finding musicians that play swing music the way I think it's supposed to be played, which is what I would say is correct. The authenticity thing is something that more and more I realize is kind of a double-edged sword, because there's nothing that's really authentic. I don't really live in 1939, and that's probably good for me. But there's something about getting the music kind of truthfully that is really important to me. And even if it's not absolutely accurate to the era, the fact that it's sort of true to the era is what's important to me, and that it's not so reminiscent of another style of jazz that it shows that you didn't actually listen to this style. So I've been very lucky that the musicians that are in my main small group, the Campus Five, have been with me for literally 20 years, except for bass players that we've changed. But I got my version 1.0 was like very, very lucky. But I have spent the last 20 years working around the country and around the world, meeting other musicians and working with other musicians, and not necessarily being able to fly all of my musicians from home. The things I think about, sometimes there are things like when I see a drummer that has a modern kit with big cymbals and a tiny bass drum, I say, well, you obviously don't like this style or play this style enough to have bothered to get what would theoretically be the correct gear. Now, can the drummer that usually plays with me, Josh Colazzo, play on a bebop kit with big cymbals and still sound right? Yeah, but it's a lot more work. And so I can theoretically play a lot of the same stuff that I played on a Telecaster through a Vox AC30, but it's going to make it a lot harder for me and make it so that I have to think about getting the sound I want to get, as opposed to just naturally getting that sound. And so things I think a lot about are phrasing. There's a thing about 1930s music that it is far more on or ahead of the beat than later styles of jazz. And what I found as a dancer is that when more modern musicians would approach this stuff with that later time feel, it really sucked all the energy out of it. And if I can get a little blue, my singer Hilary Alexander once saw a band who played Rollin', the Benny Goodman song that's arranged by Mary Lou Williams. And, but they played it with this like modern laid back thing where they, rather than hitting each note, da, 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 they would scoop up to every note. And by the time they got to the note, it'd be like really late. Boom, 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 boom. And she just kind of turned to the other person next to her and said, wow, they really cut the balls off that one. And so I've always thought that was so funny, but it's absolutely true. Like, even if you're playing a chart that's like a reproduction of Artie Shaw's chart of Lady Be Good, and you're playing it with this more modern time feel, it doesn't have the same energy at the same tempo. You have to play it faster for it to have the same energy. And as somebody that plays for dancers, like, tempo is extraordinarily important. And like the nuances of how much slower and how much faster people have to work when they're dancing really changes, how fast or slow you can play something. So I think about that time feel all the time. With bass players, it's not like a thing where they have to have gut strings, because they can theoretically make, say, metal strings work. But again, it's the kind of thing where that means they have to work that much harder to make it sound like they've got gut strings, or a big bass drum and tiny cymbals. And with other musicians in the horns, for example, the most important thing is finding people that know the style, that are idiomatic to the style, that actually listen to the style. One of the things I think is really telling is when somebody warms up on stage, they're telling you who they are, because that's the first thing they go to. And if they're like, it's like, great, that's who you are. You're going to be putting on a mask to come do this. And it's not to say that people can't be a jack of all trade, but the more they're putting on a mask to do your thing, the harder it's going to be, and the more that it's going to feel like an impression after a while. And while anybody can say, get to the chopper, and it sounds like Arnold Schwarzenegger, it's like, we'll do that for 5 minutes in character, and then how good is your Arnold Schwarzenegger? It was probably terrible. But, like an impressionist or somebody that's like really inhabiting the character is going to have that imbued in all of they do, whether they're improvising or not. And so, when I warm up, it's like, telling you who I am. That's who I am. There's no like second person that's like that doesn't happen for me. So, you know, if you can find people that actually like old jazz, it's really important. And I wish there was a better way other than like stealing people from other bands or hiring people that you see in other bands, but that's probably the best way. And then if you can find kind of traditional jazz educational things like jazz camps that have a traditional jazz core, that's a great place to find people that are sort of up and coming. And then if you can draft them into what you're doing, that really helps.